And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather showing a weak front out here, bringing some rain to the western Aleutians, and a weak front pushing up for tonight, bringing some more rain into the southern panhandle with dry conditions to the north. A trough with some moisture here over southern Alaska. Another trough up here, bringing some light snow into the Brooks Range. And for tomorrow, this front down here moves up, brings an increase in the wind and rain here all across the eastern Aleutians into the Alaska Peninsula. This week low keeps a widespread area of light snow and snow showers going here, mostly northern Bering Sea up into the Chukchi, and still some light snow in the northeast interior. Not too bad here over the Tanana Valley southward into the Copper River Basin, as well as the Gulf of Alaska. And this system tracking eastward toward the Queen Charlotte Islands, so some showers over the central and southern southeast coast with clearing up to the north. And then for the day on Sunday, we'll see this big low pressure area pulls up to eastern Aleutians here, Alaska Peninsula, the low center. Good front, gale force winds, rain here, Alaska Peninsula into Bristol Bay, rain on the increase along with the winds here along the western North Gulf Coast, Kenai Peninsula, even into southern Cook Inlet with snow. In some cases blowing snow, developing and moving northward from the Kuskokwim Valley out to the Yukon Delta coast to the north and to the east. Not too bad. Dry with some clearing and variable clouds. And for the southeast coast, mostly dry with an isolated shower or two. And for the coastal water forecasts for tomorrow, Prince of Wales Island along the coast, southeast winds at 20 knots. Here for the central coast, east winds at 20 knots. And for the north coast, west to north winds at 10 to 15 knots. Lynn Canal, small craft advisories, north 30 knots, seas 5 feet. North at 15 for Stevens Passage, and Clarence Strait, south winds 25 knots. For the day on Sunday, we've got south to southeast or east to southeast winds 10 to 15 knots for the south coast, east to south winds at 15 to 20 knots for the central coast, and the north coast east at 20 to 30 knots. Lynn Canal looking at lighter winds on Sunday, down to 15 knots from the north, and southeast at 15 for both Stevens Passage and Clarence Strait. Prince William Sound, northeast wind 10 knots tomorrow, northeast 15, northern Cook Inlet, southern Cook Inlet north at 20, northeast winds 20 knots for the Barren Islands, and for the North Gulf Coast, east to northeast winds 15 to 20 knots. And for the day Sunday, small craft advisories here for Cook Inlet, northeast winds 25 to 30 knots with seas south of the Foreland building to 9 feet. East winds 45 knots for the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay. Gale warnings for the western North Gulf Coast, east winds at 40 knots. Small craft advisories now for Prince William Sound, east at 25 knots, seas building to 6 feet. And for the eastern North Gulf Coast, east winds 30 knots. Kodiak Island tomorrow, west at 15. Otherwise, the Alaska Peninsula, east to southeast winds here at 25 to 30 knots. And for Bristol Bay, winds at light out of the south at 10 knots with seas around 1 foot. Gale warnings for Bristol Bay here coming up for Sunday there with east winds at 35 knots. Gale warnings for Kodiak Island, east to southeast winds, 35 knots. And we've got southeast winds and east to southeast winds here, 30 to 35 knots for the Alaska Peninsula. And for the western Aleutians tomorrow, anywhere from northeast to southeast winds, but only at about 20 knots out that way. Adak and Atka, a little stronger, northeast at 30 knots. Gale warnings for the eastern Aleutians, northeast winds 30 to 35 knots. Then for the day on Sunday here for the eastern Aleutians, northeast to northwest winds 25 to 35 knots. Adak and Atka, northwest 30 to 35 knots. And then a lot more lighter and variable out here to the west, about 15 to 20 there from anywhere from west of Adak out to Shemya. And for the southwest coast tomorrow, south winds 10 to 15 knots. Pribilofs northeast at 15, north at 20 for St. Matthew Island, and southeast winds only at about 10 for St. Lawrence Island and the Norton Sound area. And for Sunday, east winds at 20 knots for Norton Sound. Otherwise, St. Lawrence Island, brisk wind advisory there, northeast at 25. Gale warnings here for the Kuskokwim Delta coast. East winds 35 knots. Gales also in the forecast for St. Paul and St. George. Northeast winds 35 knots. Beaufort Seacoast, eastern Beaufort Seacoast, northeast winds 10 to 15 knots. Central Arctic coast there, northeast at 20. And for the western Arctic coast, east to northeast, 30 knots. And for the Chukchi Sea, east to northeast, 10 to 15. For Sunday, Chukchi Sea, east winds 15 knots. Still looking at brisk wind advisories here for the western Arctic coast. East winds 25 to 30 knots. East at 20 for the central coast. And brisk wind advisories now for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast for east winds at 25 knots.